Can you jump on my page and see?
Yeah, it's sideways.
That sucks. How about now? Is it broadcasting from there? Unbelievable.
Well, it's got a delay on it, so.
Oh, maybe we have to turn this on. Okay. App not installed. Oh my god.
That 360 should go on.
360 didn't kick in, right? It needs the app. Forget it. As usual, rife with technical difficulties. And that straight up doesn't work at all. Okay. Maybe I can put it on one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Asking to fall, I feel like, right?
As long as it doesn't ring.
Are we centered there? Should I move it over a little more? So we have the compound logo. This is terrible. Well, that's not so bad, right?
No.
Okay.
This one has to come with it.
Yeah. Or you can put yours back on the tripod. Want me to move your tripod over here?
No, this is the Zoom. This one's fine. Doesn't really matter. I wish it would like. Should be fine.
Yeah. Edward, what's up? How are you? Long time no see. I gotta wave to Edward here. I'm gonna wave to you too. All right, today we're gonna talk about hip concepts. When you're playing jiu-jitsu, the hips are the most important part of your body. They're the center line. They divide the northern from the southern hemisphere. And when you control a person's hips, you are able to effectively separate their body into two, a top and a bottom half. Once you separate, the probability, the statistical probability of control over one area increases because you've set it apart from the other half. So when you're playing jiu-jitsu on the attack, it's very important to dominate the hips, and you can, in fact, use your hips as a tool to dominate the other person's center line or hip area. And when you're playing defense in jiu-jitsu, it's very important to liberate your hips to keep them free and mobile. That doesn't always mean that the hips have to move away. There are many instances in which the hips move in, and that can be a form of defense. For example, defending against a submission may require that we close off a certain area, and to do that, we may lift our hips and bridge, which is a way of closing the hips right? Shrimping would be a way of opening the hips or creating a distance between us and our partner. So those things will play out for you on the mat in real time. But essentially, if this is your horizon, when your hips are across the horizon in level fashion, that would represent, for example, a mount position, where I'm mounted on top, my feet are touching, the soles of my feet are touching together, I'm on top of my partner, and then I'm driving my hips forward, and they're on a straight horizontal line. Sometimes if I move to a side mount position from a mount position, so that would mean I would dismount, right? And I'll step up on one leg, the leg closest to the head, and my bottom leg will drop. That will tilt my hips a bit. That will tilt my hips. They're still relatively on a horizontal plane, but because I want to concentrate force into the person's hip and dominate their center line, my hips may do this. They may do this when I am on the top side mount. From the bottom position, if Charlene is in my guard, when I close my legs around her hips, I'm dominating her hips. It's very easy for Charlene to control my hips because she has top position. Gravity is on her side. So even without having to hold on tightly, because remember, when you put a lot of power into your grip, all you're doing is squeezing a piece of cloth. And that's a lot of burnt energy. You're not necessarily dominating an area of the body. So if Charlene wants to be very effective and dominate my hips from the top, she could hold, or she could open her palms like this, and she could just point the fingers out and, palming the hips, glue me to the ground. And just the power of her arms alone won't be enough. And if she bends her head and takes it close, that's dangerous for her, because now I can touch the gi. So her best thing, her best position here is to attach the hands to the hips by cupping them with the fingers pointed out, and then she'll spread her knees, she'll sit down on her heels, and then she'll tilt her pelvis forward. And this does two things. It puts power into her hands because the arms actually lengthen, become straight, while the hands stay still. So instead of trying to push me to the ground, she's actually trying to hold herself up. And the alternative effect of that, the consequence of that, is that I become glued to the ground more firmly. Secondarily, when she tilts her pelvis forward, her spine becomes straight. And when her spine becomes straight, it's very difficult to pull her close to me, right? She has a much more rigid posture. That's the place that you can operate from when it comes to hips. Now, one of the things we know is that if a person's arms become straight, that's a good time to start looking for an arm lock. When I submit someone in an arm lock from the bottom guard position, their arm is not bent, right? In fact, if I were to take her arm and put it in range, hold the wrist, hold the tricep, and move through the very introductory level arm lock attack, where I turn my position, lock her back down, take my leg around the head, and then square my hips so the arm is connected to my chest. Right in this position, one of the primary defenses is for her to hold her arm in a figure four position, and the arm that I'm trying to straighten, she bends. And to make sure that I can't straighten it, she puts her other arm in front. You see, so all she's done is this. She's done a rear naked choke position on her own arm. She's kept her arm from being straight. Now my goal here would be to straighten the arm, and her goal would be to keep it bent. So if we reset back to the closed guard position, what we'll find is that a lot of the failures that occur in arm lock attacks from the bottom are because we are looking at a person's arm which is already bent and trying to force it to straighten, as opposed to taking advantage of an already straight arm. We know that the person on top has a huge gravity advantage, and we know that if they understand how to spread the knees, sit down on their base, palm the hips, and then tilt the pelvis forward, they've got a straight spine, good posture, and good base. How can we, as an attacker from the bottom guard, capitalize on this? We can note whether the arms are bent or straight. And if the arms are straight, that is a good time to
at least begin experimenting with or setting up a series of events that might lead to a successful arm lock. But in order to do that, we have to keep the arm straight. So one way to keep the arm straight is to simply put that same cup shape with my hands that she's using to dominate my hips. I just put that behind her elbow. And it's better to go a little higher than the elbow. If you go right on the cap of the elbow, we might end up out of range. So I'm talking about here. My pinky should land just above the elbow. And I'm looking to just connect. And I can do this easily without sitting up too much. I can just put my hand behind the elbow like a support, right? And now the leg on the same side as that grip helps that grip, because when I open the feet and I put the foot on the hip, I take my knee and I pinch. You see, I pinch, right? If you have the knee open here, even though it's my hand behind her, she can very easily bend the arm and she can swim out because there's a huge gap of space. So the idea when I want to attack anything is to contain or constrain all of the space around it. And once I contain or constrain the space around the appendage I am attacking, this goes for anything, wrists, necks, ankles, knees, elbows, those are the primary places we attack, shoulders. I'd like to contain and constrain all of the space around it, immobilize the entire unit, and then hone in on one tiny point. Imagine a straight line, and I need to break it in the center. Before I do that, I have to grip it at each end, right? So if I'm trying to break the arm in the middle, at the elbow joint, that means I need to dominate the shoulder all the way to the fingertips. So the first way to do that is to put something in place over which I'm going to break it. If you were breaking a stick over your knee, this cupped hand would be the knee that I break the stick over. The arm is the stick. Now, I need to put a little more constraint, so when I put the foot in the hip to help me turn, I won't leave the knee open. I'll close the knee tight. This gives me a lot of power on this side. I've got two things working against her one arm. I've got a leg and a hand working against her arm. Because I've got that locked, I can stick my foot to the ceiling, and biting down on her back, I can turn the corner until I lock her in place. Now this entire time, the arm hasn't bent. The arm has remained straight. Now that I'm closer to the arm with my second hand, I can hold the wrist. And I recommend you don't grab it. There's no need to grab the wrist and hold. If I grab your wrist, what are you gonna do? Take it away. It's a clear tell. Alternatively, if I look here at the notch in my wrist and notice that she has one that matches, I'll just lay that notch over the notch in her wrist and keep it locked to my chest. The last thing that needs to happen then is that the leg needs to pass. Now if you look here, I'll ask Charlene to just step away a second. If you look at the position of my hips, they're slightly running downhill. And if you leave your hips running downhill, you won't get the appropriate clearance. You see, my leg is stuck. I cannot clear the head appropriately to finish the arm lock. So when you pass the leg over the head, you must do this. You must put your hips back to the original position, back to the horizon. I keep wanting to say vertical horizon, which is this band from the 90s. So forgive me if I make any gaffes here. We know that the arms were straight because she was taking a very secure, postured position, and we'd like to turn that to our advantage. The straight arms are the perfect arms to lock. Bent arms are very hard to lock unless you're doing a bent arm lock, which is precisely why we have a category called bent arm locks. But we're talking about straight arm locks right now. So a straight arm lock happens because the arm is either already straight or it's easy to keep straight. One way to keep it straight is to cup the elbow behind the arm. And then I'll add some security to that by putting my foot in the hip and pinching the knee, right? So now even if she tries to keep the hand in the initial position, that makes the arm more straight. The harder she tries now to dominate from the top with pressure on her hands through my hips, the straighter her arm stays. The more she drives forward, the straighter the arm gets. It's as if she's doing a push-up off of my hips. And of course, when you lock out a push-up in the top position, the arms are relatively straight. Once this side is isolated and I've contained the area that I'm trying to attack, I've centered the stick so I can break the stick over my knee. When my second leg goes behind the armpit and I spin around that leg, first I'll lock her down so she can't sit up. And then instead of holding her wrist, I'll just try to drape the notch of my wrist over hers. Now, the part that we mentioned about the hips. When I take the foot out and use the leg and foot together to clear the head, my own hips have to square again, you see? Now they're on the vertical horizon. Now, even at this point, with no hands, when I pinch the knees and clamp down on the back of her head, it's a very tight position. And with just a little bit of pressure, which I don't need the pressure in my hands to pull her, what I need is to hold her arm exactly in the position it is, and keeping the arm contained by pinching the knees, I draw my foot down on the back of her head, and I hold her arm still while I push her away from me. That is the arm lock. Okay? Many people grab the arm like this, and they pull it to their chest, and then they do that, and the knee is wide open, and they fling themselves around the corner, and they kind of end up here, and then they throw their leg, and it looks something like this, and then they hold the arm as tightly as they can, and they go, ah! And they pull and pull and pull, and the person on the top is just staring calmly at them like they're silly, right? When in fact, if I simply contain the area by bracing the elbow, pinching the knee, now when I turn the corner, it's very easy for me to just put my leg and square my hips. Then I just hold the wrist close, and instead of pulling the arm, I drive her head away. All right, so I'm doing this. I'm trying to drive my heel to the ground, as if I wanted to stomp so that I could bridge. The reason the arm lock works is because I create a base and the person is stuck under that base so that the arm breaks backwards. Again, the analogy that works best is a stick that you'll break over your knee. And the knee in this case would be the base and the arm would be the stick. So I need to make sure that my base is solid. When you are turning your hips left or right, you are minimizing your base. If I'm laying flat with my hips on the horizon, now I have a solid base. The moment my hips turn a little bit sideways, you see how I'm falling through gravity here, I lose the base. Now I've got another base available to me, but the only way I make that base available is to maybe open the guard and then plant something on the ground. Now you see we're in a classic shrimp position. But if I'm in the guard and my hips are not on the horizon, that means they're going to tilt this way or this way. And when they tilt, they're less stable. As they tilt, I lose the power of the base. And the only way I would get it back would be to plant a foot to now reestablish a base. There's the driving power. Now here's something that's critical to understand about this. When I'm passing someone's guard, here I'm inside Charlene's guard, there's several ways to pass the guard, 3 basic. You can either go under the legs, you can go around the legs, or you can go through the middle, right? So I can put a hand under the leg and then walk all the way to the side, right? If I stand up and the guard opens, I could go around the legs, or if one leg gets lower than the other, I can go through the legs. So the examples for under would be what most people refer to, wrongly by the way, as a smash pass. I don't know where that term came from, that's not the word.
Came from Shar.
Came from Shar. Shar calls it a smash pass and thereby grossly misinforms the global jiu-jitsu community. Great work.
Winning.
Okay, so under the leg, through the legs, which means over the top of the legs, right? And then around the legs. What's critical here to Charlene successfully defending against any one of these 3 basic guard pass attempts is the position of her hips. If she keeps her hips on the horizon, she has a much better chance of tolerating and surviving and reestablishing a full guard and not having the guard pass than if she allows me to tilt her hips this way or the other, you see? So if, for example, she's playing a little guard here, and then I'm able to free one of my hands and placing it inside her thigh, walk a little bit so that now her leg gets lower on one side and higher on the other, what happens? Well, the leg didn't just get low, and the other leg didn't just get high. What happened was her hips turned. Her hips turned, right? She did the same exact tilt that we were talking about a moment ago. That tilt is the thing that keeps most people from successfully executing the straight arm lock from the bottom guard position. Here, when she has a hold of my elbow, right, and then she puts the foot in the hip and pinches, and then starts to turn the corner and holds the wrist, and then passes a leg over the head. See how her hips are straight, they're on the horizon. And because they're on the horizon, even if I try to bend my arm, I'm stuck. But if I can get her to tilt the hips a little bit, now I'm gonna ask her to just sort of disengage so you can see the bend in my arm. Go ahead, just sort of like roll out of the way a moment. That's what happened to my arm. I don't know how clear this is on the video, but there's a slight bend in my arm that wasn't there before. When her hips were straight and I was stuck in the guard position, the more I tried to push away from her, the straighter my arm got. When I took her hips and tilted them to the side, my arm naturally did this. Can you lock a bent arm using a straight arm lock technique? No. Can you lock a straight arm using a straight arm lock technique? Yes. Can you lock a bent arm using a bent arm lock technique? Yes. Was she doing a bent arm lock? No. Winner. Okay, let's go back. What I'm trying to communicate here, hopefully effectively, is that when Charlene is executing a straight arm lock using the appropriate steps, where she contains the elbow, pinches the knee, turns the corner, keeps her hips on the horizon so that when she passes the leg, everything is contained and the arm is straight. My arm is very straight right now, right? The arm that's stuck inside right here, it's very straight and it's very hard to bend. The reason it's hard to bend is because in order to bend the arm, I need to get my head close. And what is she doing with this leg? She's pushing the head away. She's trying to separate all of my body from the arm. She's getting the arm quite literally on its own. And because the arm has been entirely isolated, it can't possibly successfully defend itself against the power of her legs, her core, and both of her arms. Statistically, the odds have risen to a degree that success for her, submission for her is likely, and defense for me is unlikely. I have one little out once I'm this deep, and that is, forget about trying to deal just in the area of the arm. I need to go back to basics and actually attack her base. The reason she's successfully executing the arm lock is because she's established a significant base. I need to attack that base as a method of defense. So rather than try to save my arm by bending it, what I will try to do is keep my thumb from pointing at the sky. I know that's bad. So try to turn my palm up and keep my thumb away. And cap the outside of her knee. And then take a big step in the opposite direction. And tilt the hips. Now that the hips have been tilted, I've taken her off the horizon. You can't see it, but as we demoed a few moments earlier, there is a natural bend in my arm. And using the pressure of my body and gravity on top of her, I'll begin to build a base. Here's my base. Here it comes. Right? I'm containing. You see that pinch on her hip? Isn't that the same pinch that she just did to me right there? Right when she starts to attack the arm lock? It's the same pinch. The point is, if you want to successfully survive a submission attempt, and then fully exfiltrate yourself from it, you must reverse engineer the attack sequence as part of your defense. That's simply how this works. It's science. It's a very straightforward principle. The reason the arm becomes contained is because she places the foot in the hip and then pinches the knee while supporting the elbow. That keeps the arm straight all the way through her execution. As she turns the corner and passes the leg over the head, notice how her hips are on a level horizon. If I'm this deep and I cannot escape and I cannot bend the arm, and because the straight arm lock attacks straight arms, not bent ones, the only survival attempt here, or the only successful survival methodology, is going to be to get the arm bent again. I can't do anything when it's two legs and two arms versus my one arm, which she's isolated away from my body. She's using this leg to push me away. My whole body's going away from the arm. It's on its own more and more with each passing second. I have to go back to basics now and attack her base. So because her hips are operating on a horizon, which is what's giving her all of the containment power and the braking power, I'll cap the outside of the leg. And the purpose here is to help drag the leg across so that her hips roll off the horizon. There, that's the tilt I want. Now, how am I going to keep her from rolling back? The same base that she put on me, on my back, on my head, that she was using to break the arm, I'll now put on her. So this leg, which is free because I'm leaning my weight on the other leg, therefore it's stuck, this leg becomes light. When I tilt to my left, my right side becomes light. It's light enough to pick up, and I wedge. And I pinch her the same way she pinched me. And now using that pressure, I can start to drive, pull the arm out, and walk to a more dominant side position. Okay, so it really is this simple. When Charlene is laying on her back and doesn't have me in her guard, I'll just let you show. I'll let her show you this without a partner, right? She's laying on her back, and the guard position's been established.
Over here.
Mm-hmm. Her hips are on a horizon. This is where she's powerful, when she's on the horizon line. If I can get the hips to tilt, it takes away power. If I can get the hips to tilt, it takes away power. Not only can I minimize the effects of chokes and arm locks and all sorts of attacks by taking the hips off the horizon, but I can also establish guard passes. So, for example, the same tilting mechanism that I use to defend the straight arm lock, which we just discussed, is the same mechanism that I'll use to initiate a guard pass. Let's just to change it up a bit, say that I'm standing inside the guard, even when the guard is opened, right? Even when the guard is opened. You see that for her to be successful and remain connected with me and establish entanglements and grips and tension, her hips are, at least initially, kept on the horizon. Now, she may be the person who changes the angle of her hips when she starts to establish an open guard position of her choice. Okay, so she's doing something kind of spidery, right? She's getting a little spidery here, right? The aranya. So here she is, she's playing spider guard. And you see that even with spider guard, she's got a high leg, which is straight, and she's got a low leg, which is bent, but her hips are still on the horizon. And she can transition between these two bent and straight positions just by flexing her knees and extending her knees, but the hips are straight. Now the question is, what happens if, in the course of her transitioning from one side to the other, I take the hips off that horizon line? Now the hips are off the horizon line. Because the hips are off the horizon line, the base that she was using, which is the mat, and which is her flat hips on the mat, that's disappeared. We're a little out of camera here, so let me see if we can do this, right? Here the danger is that the hips are flat. The danger is not really the spider guard. She could play spider, she could play X, she could play worm, she could play pistachio nut, she could play lasso, she could play whatever. It doesn't really matter what new guard comes out. The point is the hips have to have a base, and that base works best on a horizon. If I can take her off the horizon, right here one leg is straight, the easiest way to take someone's legs off the horizon when they're playing this kind of entanglement is to hold the straight leg and then walk towards the short one. Why? Because the straight leg is pushing up And because the straight leg is pushing up, I'm going to help it come more up. The bent leg is already driving back toward her, which means it's easier to put it low. So this is not a question of power. It's just a question of I'm going to take a sideways step toward the short leg while I contain her high leg. And the natural result of this is that her hips are going to tilt. We're going to take her off the horizon and make her flat. And make her tilted. Right? And then from this position, there's any number of ways that I can begin untangling. Right? I could step on the leg here while I rip the arm clean and then just walk right through the guard. Hello. Right? And start to pass. It doesn't really matter how you decide to pass. That's up to you. And the pass will dictate itself as you follow the principle. But right now, the principle that's making her successful is that her hips are on the horizon. Now let's say that she chooses another type of guard. Maybe she can't touch my sleeves as much, so she has to hold my feet, right? Here, she's got a De La Hiva position established. Her leg is coming around the outside of mine to the extent that her foot has captured and is flexing backwards on the inside of my thigh. She's using that same side hand to hold my heel, and the purpose of this is to keep my knee from rotating out. Right? She's pulling my heel so that my foot goes this way. She's trying to get my toes to point at her. And of course, my struggle would be how I can take my knee and turn it out. Right? And remove her De La Hiva hook. In any event, the reason this is successful for her at present is because the position was established using a horizontal hip line. Rather than worry about all kinds of fanciful disentanglements, and I want to say this, this is a critical element to understand. Much of what goes on in the jiu-jitsu world that is bad pedagogy, bad teaching, is the idea that for every guard position, there is a pass. That's simply not true. Guard passing is guard passing is guard passing. You do not have to do the X-guard pass to pass the X-guard. What you have to do is figure out how you can reverse engineer the entanglement. Once you've reverse engineered the entanglement, all passing is the same. You are either going to go under the legs, over the legs, or around the legs. Guard passing should not be identified specific to the guard that's being played. Guard passing should be identified, should be methodologized by, can I take the person's hips off the horizon? Once I do, what are my options? Are they under the legs? Are they through or over the legs? Or are they around the legs? Obviously, around is the least entangled. Through is the most entangled. Under is usually somewhere in between. Here, she's taken a De La Hiva position. Doesn't really matter that it's De La Hiva. I don't need to do a De La Hiva pass. What I need to do is think about how I can capitalize on where she's most greatly entangled me and then attacking her hips. This is another thing too, right? We often think that guard passing is a defensive position and I'm surviving the guard by activating a series of passes. But guard passing is an attack. Guard passing is offensive. If it's not offensive, even under the horrible IBJJF rules, why are you getting points for something that's defensive? We know that you don't get scored or awarded points on successful defense. You get scored or awarded points on successful offense. So in this instance, the guard pass of any sort is considered an offensive technique because I'm being awarded points on a competition scale and in a real life scenario where I'm defending myself by getting past the person's legs to dominate them in a street match or in a bar fight or in an MMA contest, I'm also advancing my position by getting past their line of defense. So here we are, and it's not really a question of how do I pass De La Hiva. It's a question of, in the bigger principle, in the bigger scope of things, how do I minimize her base, right? So one of the ways I can minimize her base is I notice I'm very entangled here on this side. She's entirely dominated my right side with her hook and with her hand control. So if I walk toward that side, I'm walking deeper into the trap. I'd rather put my hand inside her opposite thigh and then cap her outside knee. Notice how I'm not grabbing the gi, because grips are always compensations for weakness. Unless you're choking, you don't need to grab. You can connect. And now I'll take a big lateral step this way. Now what does this lateral step do? It turned her hips. It took the hips off the horizon. Now that the hips are off the horizon, I have a high leg and I have a low leg. And I can start to look and see what makes sense. Does it make sense to go under, around, or through? Or we can say under, around, or over. In this instance, because the leg is low, it's going to make the most sense for me to go over. I have a little issue here because she's still holding my foot, but that doesn't stop me. Since she's turning my foot this way and making my knee point this way, I'll help her. I'll allow her to continue pointing my knee this way, and I'll just take the knee and lay it across. And now you see we've moved into a very classic knee cut position. So again, it doesn't matter what type of guard is being used. What matters is how you're going to undo the individual's base. The base is because the hips are on the horizon line. I need to take the hips off the horizon line. Off the horizon line. Once the hips are off the horizon line, I can attack. And that same principle is what applies in the initial arm lock demonstration that we showed. That principle of horizontal hips is what allows the arm lock to become successfully executed. Tilted hips prevent the arm lock. Questions? What time do we end?
18 minutes ago.
Oh, we were supposed to end 18 minutes ago. That's fine. Let's do this.
This is just going to run out of time, so we're just going to end this.
If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them now. Charlene's got a feed going. I've got a feed going on Facebook. The members were on a Zoom meet, so they can chat with us there. But I'll give everyone a few minutes here if they have any questions or comments they want to make. And Charlene's going to watch that because I can't see. I'm officially over 40 years old now, and my eyes need assistance in the form of glasses, and I don't have them with me.
So the problem with Facebook is it tells you who joined in to watch at some point, but it doesn't tell you who's still watching. Like there's.
Oh, okay. Okay, apparently the class was so incredible that there's no questions. So congratulations, Sundar, another amazing jiu-jitsu session. Congratulations, Charlene.
Concur.
Another incredible jiu-jitsu session with two people who are doing our best to serve our jiu-jitsu community during this pandemic. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you every Monday and Friday at 12:15. We'll try to post in advance so that you can prepare to watch. And of course, this recording will be available. Take care, everybody. And if you have any more questions or comments, hit us up in that section.
Bye, y'all.